So, okay, I'm going to move on to our guest today, Will Berger, this is your third time here, or third time with us. You did a webinar and you did a symposium with us during the ring. And so this is his third visit with us. Will's an author. He's got his newest book, Seeking the Sublime Cash. And it's back there and available for sale. Will will sell you one of his books. He'll sign it for you. And also, speaking of Wagner, and these are transcripts of the talks he gave for the Ring and the most recent full Ring productions at the Metropolitan Opera. He's on the Metropolitan Opera radio, and sometimes you see him on the HGs. Every once in a while they drag him out and have him talk about some obscure things that are always of great interest. And I've been a fan of Will's for a really long time. I've gotten to know him, and he's always delightful. And so with that, I will introduce our speaker today, William Berger. And one thing I'm going to let you know is that we are filming. We are not live Zooming it. We are filming. So please, if you have to exit, well, don't exit this way. Exit to the back of the room and out if you have to have an emergency or anything. And cell phones off. Thank you.
And cell phones off. It all comes down to that, doesn't it?
Yeah, I'm guilty.
Yeah, no, we all do it. We all do it.
Yeah, I'm going to take care of it right now.
Hi, and thank you. Thank you, Terry. And I want to come here for Liebesverbot. Because I've never managed to catch it. There's a lot of it, too, and there's a lot to learn. So I'm looking forward to that. And it is good to be here. And it is good to be in a room as opposed to a Zoom. I've been in a lot of both in the last couple of weeks. And let's see. What can we do with lights? Maybe I don't need it out, but maybe a little darker. So yeah, that'll do. All right, let me intro this right. One, thank you all for coming on this disturbingly nice day in November. And it is great and kind of heavy to be back in San Francisco and seeing people from San Francisco Opera, my old stomping grounds, and so forth. Yes, I have a book I'm trying to sell, but I'm actually here to talk stuff. And we are hearing a lot of talk about racism and systemic oppression in the performing arts today, and especially now as we begin this kind of painful process of reopening theaters and all performance venues and museums and so forth. So here are the questions I want to bring up today about this and for us, which is number one, what are we talking about? What do I mean by that? What does it mean to say that a work from the past, whoa, maybe, yeah, maybe, yeah, no, I need a little light on.
Maybe these should be turned.
I can do it from memory to a point.
And you need light too.
Light on him would be great.
Yeah,
that's
Yeah, this is better.
Green is not as good.
Yeah, it's good enough.
It's good enough.
It's good enough. We're gonna have, I'll make it work. Watch me. I do this on radio too. Imagine in your mind. Okay, so what are we talking about here? What does it mean to say a work from the past is racist or toxic? What can we do about it? Can we detoxify these works? Should we? Do we not want to discuss it? Because I don't want to discuss it. I'm sure you don't, and I'm sure no one wants to discuss it. Should we dispense with works from the past altogether? Because you're not going to find one that does not have toxicity in it. And why are we talking about it more now? Why is it suddenly ubiquitous? First of all, can you hear me? Okay.
Yeah.
Why is it suddenly ubiquitous? Is it just fashionable, or are there reasons why we have to talk about it now? And then there's us. We who have a specific interest in Wagner, the flashpoint of all controversy in the arts. They all convene in this one place called Wagner. We've been dealing with this one way or another as fans of this art for a long time. So, what can we offer to the discussion from our collective experience of grappling with these questions? We were grappling with them literally before anybody else was. We were talking about this before it was cool, you know. And then the other way around. What can we learn from the discussion as it is out there now, here, 2021, to inform our long experience as Wagnerians with this? Now, I've been out on book tour, and I've been doing talks also. I'm going to kill my brother's computer before I'm done here, I just know it. And I've learned a lot about what's on people's minds, about what people want to talk about. I've been to Chicago, Boston, Charleston, South Carolina twice, more on which in a moment, LA twice, and a bunch of things in New York. And I've been hearing things about what people are thinking about now. Not in 1876, at the time of the premiere of The Ring. That's another story. Not even 2 years ago BC, as Terry puts it, but now. And I did a webinar for San Francisco Opera in March, I think it was. And it was great. They came at me and said, do we need to have a discussion of controversy in The Ring of the Nibelung? I said, yes, you do. And I need to do it. And it was big. It was kind of big. But this is not the same as that. This today is not the same as that because we are not the same as we were in March. And the entire world has basically changed every couple of hours. And the issues have changed, and that is interesting. And I also gave a talk along these lines in Boston 3 weeks ago, and that was interesting. This is different, because it is different. Time is a river flowing into nowhere, as Harlan Ellison said, and as we already know from The Ring of the Nibelung, that you can't step into the same river twice, even if it's the same music. You're hearing different music because you're hearing it for the second time in 17 hours. Like the Rhine Maidens, right? It's the exact same music at the end. No, it isn't, because you've changed. Okay, and then another thing, and this is all the intro, because Wagner's like that. Think of me as the Norn. We've been performing to Meistersinger von Nurnberg at the Met. I don't know if you caught any of the broadcasts. I hope you have, because we've all had this feeling that it's been very special, and not just in the sense of a good performance, which it has been, terrific performance, and Maestro Papano back at the Met after hundreds of years, it seems, and it was incredible that way and many other ways, but also, again, I think we in the audiences heard this work in a different way because it was the first post-pandemic live Wagner. So it's going to be different, and it was. And I think there was a great thirst for, not only for grand opera, but that scope of grand opera, Die Meistersinger von Nurnberg. So this, while I was talking about The Ring specifically for San Francisco Opera in March, I've got Meistersinger on my mind now. And so that's where I'm approaching it from right now. And I mean right now. Night before last, we did a broadcast. And, you know, a broadcast of Die Meistersinger is something. You know, it's 6 hours and 3 minutes of me on air. Like, I'm a little tired right now, but anyway, but good tired. Now, the problems, and they're there, that people are talking about today are found most authentically in the works of Richard Wagner. But here's the interesting thing I found that I really want to share with you. So are some of the answers. And that's not something that, you know how you get when you're going to a Wagner performance and you tell one of your friends who's not a person in this room, and you get that, oh, really? You know what I'm talking about. So it's not only, that's good news. So not only do we have to beat our chests and do mea culpa here as Wagner fans, but I found that there are answers to problems in the arts in Wagner too. And that, I think, will be of interest. Finally, how are these problems and solutions different today, right now, than all the many times that we've discussed them in the past? Didn't we, for example, already, whether we were alive yet or not, as a demographic, didn't we already go through the process of denazifying Wagner in 1951? When they reopened the Bayreuth Festival after the Third Reich for the first time. Like, in other words, haven't we already discussed this? Well, they had their problems in 1951, we have our problems. So the short answer, here's something really weird. New Bayreuth, the reopening of Bayreuth, 1951. That was, I'm not good at math, that was 70 years ago. 70 years before that was when Bayreuth was preparing for the second festival for Parsifal. So whatever answers and solutions Wieland and Wolfgang Wagner came up with in 1951 need to be re-questioned now. We need to go through the process as thoroughly as they did. In other words, we need to do the exact same thing they did, completely different. So what do we need to do? Yes, it's a PowerPoint presentation. Well, I've summed it up this way. We need to assess what the problems are now, not what we thought they were in 1951 or whenever. We need to determine what we can do so that we can keep these works going, because I want to do that, and I know you do too. How do we preserve these works as part of the cultural landscape in a way that preserves that which is worth preserving in them, which we know to exist? How do we make it clear what we believe these works are and what they're not? And we need to do that. We have to define the classics, or else the lowest, basest among us will define them for us and use them against you because they're powerful. Just like Scripture. Very like Scripture. Third, I think we need to share our discoveries along with our art that we're doing, getting things out there like Das Liebesverbot. We need to get our discoveries out into the general conversation. And if we do enough, well, one, to get people's input, and if we do enough of a good job for general edification. Okay, so what are the problems? When I talk about problems in Wagner, what are the problems? Well, they're less visible than in other operas, and I'm talking about typical conversations we've had to have when we produce operas in works like Otello, Verdi's Otello, and Puccini's Madame Butterfly, where are there issues of othering that border on racism in these works? Well, those issues that we do need to talk about are what you see. And we have less of that in Wagner. The issues are thematic, which is murkier. So we have to dig a little deeper. They're not as immediately apparent, literally, to audiences. So let's talk about Die Meistersinger. Okay. Now, some of the issues that are discussed in Die Meistersinger, okay, let's all get on the same page here. I know most of you know Die Meistersinger, some of you probably know it way better than I do. You are the experts, but let's just get to the same place and not make any assumptions. So very quickly, or let's try very quickly. Die Meistersinger von Nurnberg, the Master Singers of Nuremberg, Richard Wagner's only mature comedy after Das Liebesverbot. the only one that's part of the Bayreuth canon. Those are that are still performed at the Bayreuth Festival. It's also his longest work, his longest single work, not counting The Ring as one. It is a comedy, it is funny, although I prefer it when they don't force the comedy and let the human story come through, because comedy doesn't age well over time that way. Okay, whatever on that. How can we do an outline of Die Meistersinger in less than a minute and not sound like an Anna Russell parody? Well, I'll do it. Okay. Unlike any of other Wagner's mature operas, Die Meistersinger von Nurnberg takes place in a historical time. In fact, you can trace it to the year 1558, which becomes pretty interesting, actually, and I'll get to that. But, so right away, that gives it a level of realism that is not present in his mythological works, such as The Ring. So right away, you are talking about different issues. So when you're talking about, is there racism in The Ring of the Nibelung? Yes, but it's one way because that is a mythological reinterpretation. When there are these issues in Die Meistersinger von Nurnberg, it's not a mythical reinterpretation. We're talking about a historical moment of a community in change trying to define themselves politically. In other words, what is the German nation? Where is it? Where are the borders? These are still, you can still read these issues in the papers today. Who are the German people? When you're in the middle of a landmass and everything's floating all over the place, where is your country? And the same, there were geographical problems with this in 1868 when Wagner premiered this opera. And to a certain extent there still are, but you had issues in defining Germany that you didn't have in France and Spain and Britain and Italy in the same way, where there are geographic definitions. So if Germany as a nation is trying to create itself in the Second Reich, the German Empire, and say, well, where are we? Well, we're where the German people are. Well, who are the German people? Well, they're Germans. Well, is that they speak German? Yeah, pretty much, but then so do the Swiss, so no. Is it a cultural hegemony? Is it what? What is it? And these were real questions from people. Okay, the rundown. Hans Sachs, an actual person who lived, an actual Meistersinger of Nuremberg. If you attend church services, you've sung his works. Either words or music or occasionally both. Sleepers wake, joy surrounds us, right? That's all I'll inflict on you. Well, a little bit more. Dun 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 da da dum bum bum ba da dun. Of course, that little figure da da dum is basically considered the Reformation in 3 notes. You have anything that has the Reformation in it, you'll hear bum bum bum. I don't know why. It sounds like the Reformation to people. To people who like the Reformation. Because there are others, we'll get to that. Okay, Hans Sachs, a shoemaker. No, not really. He was the head of the Guild of Shoemakers. So that means he was, I don't know if he made shoes the way we see him in the thing. I mean, he did at one point in his life, whatever. But this is the idea that a regular German citizen, a proper, hardworking artisan is also a great artist and the keeper of the national traditions. And that's heavy as it gets, right there. So he's there, he's in Nuremberg with his friends, the Meistersingers, who keep the rules of the tradition. Boy, do they keep the rules. One of them decides, and it's very murky, and then there are these issues, and I find that the women I work with just find it very difficult to read the synopses I write. But basically, the wealthiest of these tradesmen decides to honor art. He will give his daughter, and Wagner is very hedgy on how the rules work of this, but if you win the song contest that's coming up, sort of, but it's complicated, then you can marry his daughter, who is not coincidentally named Eva, as in all women, as in Eve, womanhood. And of course, we have a tenor, because you always have a tenor. And the tenor is showing up and he wants one thing. Well, this one wants two things. He wants to, well, no, he wants one thing which needs two things. He wants Eva. Well, you have to win a song contest according to the rules of the guild in order to do that, and it's tomorrow. Okay, so basically in real time, almost, how do I write a winning song? And he does, and we all know what happens, and the prize song is the greatest thing ever, and it's just remarkable. There is also a bad guy, because this is Wagner, there must be a bad guy. That's true. That becomes part of our story. Sixtus Beckmesser. He is the pedantic town clerk who is a stickler for the rules and inappropriately old, and he wants to win the contest and marry Eva, run off with our virgin daughters. Yes, Sixtus Beckmesser was understood as a personification of Jewish intellectual thought in the mid-19th century. It was based on Edvard Hanslick. His original name, as we know, was Hans Lick, who was the music critic of the Vienna paper. Very influential, did not like Wagner, and the feeling was returned. What was the great quote of, there is music in it, but it is not music? Is that about Tristan, I think? I don't know, but they had a thing. Okay, but actually there's that. He's the bad guy, he's the dirty old man who wants to do terrible things to our lovely Aryan virgin daughters. Walter von Stolzing is our tenor, proud knight. They're very suspicious of knights, aristocrats. He comes in, he's going to learn the rules. He likes to sing, but he doesn't go according to the rules. He's self-taught. Interestingly, and very importantly, from the classics, from the ancient German writers, and of course, from Walter von der Vogelweide. And I basically live for every day I get to say Walter von der Vogelweide. And Wagner did too, because you've met Walter in Tannhäuser. This guy is addicted to song contests. That one is in the 12th century, and then he comes in as Walter says, Walter von Stolzing, proud, Stolz, proud, pride, that his teacher was, and he gives him a theme, big theme. Walter von der Vogelweide, like you whistle it on the way out. That means something. Composer wants you to remember that. Okay, and Walter wins, and then Eva, they say, okay, you're a master singer. Here, put on the badge. And he says, no, I don't need it. I'm too cool and radical and rock and roll. And Hans Zach says, no, take it. Because the traditions of the master song are what is giving you what you want with Eva. It's kind of heavy. So the contest is romantic, erotic. It is artistic. It is political. It is defining who are we. Who gets to marry Eva. In other words, it's all the same. Okay. Now, of course, you know that in Hans Sachs has, Michael Fola just told us this is not a great role, this is the supreme role in opera. It's like, well, I could sing it that well, I'd say the same thing, but it's plausible. And he does go on about making shoes, about German racial destiny, about wisdom in the arts, about how to write a song. And in the end, when he's telling Walter to follow the example of your German teachers, he has a monologue that is always signaled out as this is insufferable. We cannot play the words that Hans Zach says. I don't find it so, but I'm getting to that. So even when Maestro Papano came up to interview with us in Met Opera Radio 2 weeks ago, he said, well, now, first of all, I have to apologize for Zach's final monologue, which of course includes the rather pungent phrase that is always translated as, you know where I'm going with this, obey your German masters. Which, of course, we, as people who have dug into this, understand perfectly. Wait, no, that doesn't mean, that's not the right translation of it. It's honor your German teachers, which is a sublime idea. But, of course, if I had lived through the experience of the Third Reich and I had to hear the words, I might not care what some guy in 2021 in San Francisco says about the proper translation of, what is it, or Deutsch, oh my God, the endings. I missed one day of Duolingo yesterday, and I can't remember any German endings, but Ert, honor, whatever. How I translate it, they just, in the 1950s, did not want to hear those words, or a lot of people did. But, and here's where it gets weird and interesting. That doesn't bother me. That monologue. I was listening to, I heard 6 performances in the last month of this, and I kept thinking, am I going to start feeling queasy here? And really listening to the inner voice of like, is this bothering me or not? No, that does not bother me. But even Meistersinger, when he was asked to talk about issues in Meistersinger, he was saying, it was basically, let me put it this way, talking about the problems of 1954 when Meistersinger was presented at New Bayreuth, not about now. So it's not enough for us to say what we think the problem should be. We have to look at them again and say, is this a problem? It doesn't put us in solidarity with the victims of the Third Reich to be triggered by the same things that would have triggered them. It just makes us lazy. There are problems in Meistersinger. That's not one of them. So, for heaven's sake, let's get past that. What are the problems? Hold on. I'm there. The problem for me is the paranoia, the need to demonize the other that is present in basic... there's the inability to self-identify without an evil alter ego, as there is in The Ring with Wotan and Albrecht, and then there's that really weird point where they talk about Licht Albrecht, like Wotan is the Albrecht of light, and then he just goes on monologuing as he does. It's like, wait, go back, explain that to me. What do you mean? So there's always an evil alter ego. And when, after Walter von Stolzing talks about Walter von der Vogelweide, and, you know, there I was, I'm stillen Herd, and, you know, I learned to sing by my own hearth and all this, and everything was great, and spring came, and I went skipping through the daisies, or whatever he does. But then an owl flew out from the bush who envied my happiness. And that's Albrecht's term also from The Ring. Hate the happy, he tells Hagen. This is the idea that there are forces there waiting to pounce on you because they hate your way of life, they hate your beauty. And Wagner cannot conceive of making an individual without, and not even, let alone a nation, without having the bad guy. You have this in Lohengrin, which of course was absolute catnip for the Third Reich, right? Like, right now the forces are amassing in the east, ready to invade our German homeland. Well, okay, in Lohengrin, that's not an unthinkable thing in the time of King Henry the Fowler in the 10th century or whatever, fine, whatever. But that's not what the Third Reich heard. The Third Reich heard, that's true. We better get them first. And the word Hans Sachs uses in that final monologue, and he uses, it appears elsewhere in The Ring of the Nibelung, is a hot word. The word is Welcher. And Welcher means foreign. Welcher means a lot more than foreign. It's specifically foreign in a Latin way, Southern European Roman Empire way. It's related, oh my God, your head's going to explode when I bring this up. It's related, I'm told, and I learned, giving talks on this, to the word Guelph, Remember that with the Ghibellines and Guelphs, and right away you're like, no, wait, too complicated, no, stop. And I am too. But in other words, the Guelphs and the Ghibellines, the great ideological battle in medieval Europe between the pro-papal and pro-imperial, in other words, Italian versus German ideals of how Europe should be. Sound familiar? Old myths don't just die hard, they don't die at all. So when Hans Sachs is talking about this, and this is really interesting, and I can only go over it a little here, but Welcher is the term in Richard Strauss's Der Rosenkavalier that when they're making fun of Octavian, when Baron Ochs's lackeys are saying, get out of here, they call him Welcher, which in other words, you Italian foreign cur is the word, right? And then they used to use a word that sounds like Diego that I won't repeat now in the English translations of like basically you Southern European dog, right? Welcher. And what Hans Sachs says is if our leaders are imbued in those ideas, our sovereigns won't understand the people. It's not wrong. And remember that Richard Wagner was the Kapellmeister, the court music master of Dresden, Kingdom of Saxony, early on. And by weird European political vicissitudes, the Kingdom of Saxony, which is the home of what was the home of Martin Luther, I mean the downtown Lutheranism, by political machinations because of the Kingdom of Poland, what? Yes, the King of Saxony was Roman Catholic by law, and the court was Roman Catholic. And the idea of, which meant that you prayed in Latin, which comes up in the Meistersinger, like if you're praying in a foreign language, that's not authentically German, which is a whole issue, and a lot of Austrians would disagree with that, and a lot of Bavarians, but whatever. The idea again, who are we? And if we're not praying in German, are we authentically German? Which Martin Luther felt was a very big issue, and Hans Sachs, who's mouthing Martin Luther quite a bit, right? It's not too out there, but the idea of beware of foreign ideas that are waiting to take over is something that becomes more toxic considering the contemporary situation. And Wagner can't do without it, Verdi can. At the same time, doing the exact same, born the same year as Wagner, working very hard and centrally to try and make a political unit out of his theoretical nation of Italy, which did not exist as a nation. It did by 1868, but only just barely and not completely. But Verdi, during, it was 1859, the absolute formation of the Kingdom of Italy, and the occupying foreign Austrian troops were retreating across Verdi's property in the province of Parma. And as they left, they blew up some buildings in Piacenza, I think, or Modena, one adjacent town to Verdi's property. They had literally marched across, and there's this letter, and I usually quote it verbatim, but I think I've got it by now, that he wrote to his friend, the Countess Maffei, and he said, they're gone. At last they're gone. And may they return to their homeland, the Austrians, and find their skies as beautiful as we find ours. Yeah, okay, this tells me everything I need to know about Verdi, as does Aida, who's the bad guy in Aida? No, they're nations at war, but we don't have to, those foreigners are out to get our Egyptian ways. No, there's none of that. There are people. And Verdi can have a bad guy, hello, Iago, but he doesn't need one to define a hero. Outside of Otello, I mean, you don't need one. Who's the bad guy in La Traviata? Well, no, wait, who's the good guy in La Traviata? But you know what I mean. Okay. Now, so German nationalism should be no more suspect than anyone's nationalism, except in this. The delusional paranoia, as in De Meistersinger, as in Lohengrin. yes, it's there in Parsifal too, oddly. Let's not even get started on the ring or we'll be here until Shavuos. And, okay, maybe what I need to say is, here we can get a lesson from Wagner. What we can learn is that we all need to go through the same process that I just went through on Meistersinger of saying, what is the problem here? Not as what do I think I should say the problem is, but what do I feel is the problem here? We need to go through that process with ourselves all the time, in everything outside of the opera house. In other words, do I conflate my patriotism, to which I have a right, with the need for a bad guy? Can I be patriotic without demonizing the other? It's hard. And maybe I need to say right now that we as Wagnerites can apply that to present day headlines when we read about, when you have to address the immigration issue as the subhumans from Mexico. And yes, I am part of a Mexican immigrant family, so I feel that especially, but that's not even the point. It's a human, we don't have to say, there's a problem and we need to fix it by dehumanizing anybody. We don't. That's the kind of Hans Sachs. There's a sublime Hans Sachs and there's a toxic Hans Sachs. And you need to choose what you are daily in today's issues. When there was the ban on Muslims entering the country, which was very mind-boggling to me. And I remember, of all people, you will be surprised to hear me refer to this. Cosima Wagner. Did you ever read the 2,200 pages of her diaries? It's not easy. First of all, every weird thing Richard Wagner ate and every detail of his digestion. And if you look carefully, you think I'm crazy. I'm telling you, he kept kosher. But whatever, that's it. But she writes in there, she's reading the headlines, and she never writes anything that wasn't his idea. Also. And she said they're reading the papers, and they saw that the British Empire was engaging in the Second Zulu War, and they thought, how can they do this? How can Disraeli do this? After all, the Zulus are people exactly like us. Cosima Wagner. Bismarck passed a law, a repressive law against the Socialist Party. And Cosima Wagner wrote, can you imagine passing a law against a specific group of people? Hold on to that thought for 50 years, Cosima, because it's going to come back and bite us all hard. But if I was offending anybody by the comparison to today's headlines, okay. As Wieland Wagner discovered, the process of cleaning out the attics is not always easy. That was his phrase. But assessing the problems in you can also show us where the healing might already be taking place. Hold on, this is really good news. That means that things like I said about Maestro Papano apologizing for the obey your German masters line, we may not have to do that anymore. And this is something interesting that happened. I think I told you about this, Jeff. Remember when we had a student group from Atlanta coming for Porgy and Bess originally? Okay. High school students, way too smart, really annoyingly smart. Group of high school students, all African American from Atlanta, up as a group to see Porgy and Bess. And they said to me, great, they said, okay, tell them about Porgy and Bess and tell them why it's not racist. And I thought, okay, this is not going to happen. What I'm going to do is ask them what their experience is with this work. And it was really interesting because these were young people. I mean, the head of the group was 15. Right? And she said something that kind of rocked my world. She said, our parents had problems with the language of Porgy and Bess, of being, the cliche of these African American people speaking bad English. Like, Bess, you is my woman now. She said, but we don't see it as bad English. We understand it as good gullah. Boing, zoinks, like... that in the time, from the 1930s to now, everything changed underneath, and they didn't have to feel triggered by the cliche of bad language because it had become not bad language. We had to remember Ebonics, right? Remember that disaster? So in other words, at what point does something become a language that you can use in law courts? And Gulla's been, the Bible's been translated into Gullah now. It wasn't in 1935. And I think that's really, really interesting. So something can, we have this sense of when people are complaining about, oh, everyone's being PC and all this. No, actually it works in a lot of ways. Sometimes some of the issues solve themselves if we're paying attention to where we really are in the present moment. And I think that's pretty interesting and good news. I remember when we did Guillaume Tell at the Met. You know, they hadn't done it, well, since 1896, but they hadn't done it for a decade. Guillaume Tell of Rossini, great work. Even past the overture, the other 5 hours. Yeah, it's Wagnerian, it really is. And a bunch of old timers had said, well, you can't play that overture because everyone will giggle. So, but, you know, because they'll be thinking the Lone Ranger. And we had to say, hey, newsflash, nobody under the age of 90 is thinking of the Lone Ranger. And also, people over the age of 90 who are thinking of it, it's long ago. So no one's going to giggle over it, and everyone was sitting, it was so great because everyone was hearing this, in most cases, live for the first time. I had never heard it live because no one had ever programmed even the overture. Because, you know, it's too pop. Well, it isn't too pop, and it changed. So there's no reason for our reaction to be what we think it should have been 50 years ago. Okay. Then there's this. Yeah. Remember I said that Walter von Stolzing and Sixtus Beckmesser are involved in a romantic, political, and racial battle. Okay, so this is what we know today. And I've been discovering in new ways in the last 6 weeks on tour. Newsflash, same thing. Intersectionality in Wagnerian terms. Okay, so yes, genre and gender are the same word. Or they come from the same word. One is medieval French. I don't know why we use it in English. It's fun to say. Gender, same word. Genita, plural of genus in Latin. In other words, your ethnicity. Same word. Why aren't we talking about this? Now, was it Wagner and Eva who both say, es gibt hier Kunst, what matters here is art. And of course, Wieland Wagner, when he did, interestingly, his production of Meistersinger, put up a sign at the Bayreuth Festival. So like, okay, I'm really done talking about the Nazi stuff. And he said in the language of the time, it made no difference to him whether Hans Sachs was performed by a German or a Chinaman. That was in English, but you know, it was progress at the time, what can I say? Because es gibt hier Kunst. But, jedoch, Kunst is not a thing over there. And it's in Meistersinger that we learn that. The intersectionality of aesthetic. You know, I get this all the time. Don't be political. You're talking music. Sorry. Sorry. It's like taking water out of the ocean. There is no art for art's sake. Or, better yet, we who study the Gesamtkunstwerk, the total work of art, know that it doesn't mean what people think it means. It means an expression of the finest aspirations of the whole community. Now, Wagner knew he had a problem. He didn't even want to call his works operas, right? Music dramas. Because he didn't want them to be associated with that trash like Donizetti, only the Saxon word he used wasn't trash. And you know, that always kind of annoyed me about Wagner. But then I'm realizing, you know, we all do this. we all do this, and I write biographies for bands, you know, like for press releases. And you never get one new band, new music, that will say, oh, this is the genre we are. We are a rock and roll band. We are a southern rock band. We are a death metal band. No. They always give, well, we're kind of death metal with black and Norwegian influences with a touch of prog, and yeah, okay, that's great. Like Richard Wagner, of course your works are different, just like everybody else's. And that becomes an issue that's really interesting and has been coming up with, remember our friend Hans von Bülow? Oh my God, is he a whole story of his own? But of course, besides the first husband of Cosima, Wagner, and then after that didn't work out so well, still the preferred conductor of the Wagner family, and you know, whatever else he was, this is the man who conducted the world premiere to Son des Olden. No one else in history has done that, so great conductor. And there was the Verdi Requiem, which I would love to give a whole talk on. I have recently given a bunch of talks on. And famously, Bülow commented sneeringly, and it is repeated to this day at the Grand Tier Bar, you can hear it any day, Oper in Kirchgewande, opera in church dress. Which, yes, I know for a fact, Gewande has also, well, Gewandhaus, like at the Cloth Hall in Leipzig, but also Gewande does mean drag. Opera in church drag. And this is supposed to be a put down. Now, Francis Toy, who didn't always have great music commentary, didn't always say things I like, but he said the greatest line of his career in the 1920s, he said, if this opera is better suited, if this work is better suited to the opera house than the church, then so much the worse for the church. And of course, Brahms heard that Bülow had said this, and he opened randomly a page of the Verdi Requiem that somebody had sent him. He said, Bülow made a big mistake, because any idiot could tell that this could only have been done by a genius, meaning the Verdi Requiem. But Bülow didn't say it wasn't. Bülow's problem with the Verdi Requiem was not that it wasn't good music. Who would think that? Sorry. His problem was that it was in the disguise of its binary opposite. It is musical transvestitism, literally. It is something that is not in the place where it's supposed to be, which is the immigration problem, which is the problem with empowerment of women. If something is not keeping to its right, all binaries are hierarchies, newsflash. Except in laboratory conditions, you cannot have perfectly equal binaries. Jim Crow, we learned it the hard way. So when he said, Oper in Kirchgewande, he's saying it's a cheaper thing trying to disguise itself as a better thing. Or something along those lines. It's something that's not keeping to its proper borders, and it's wrong. And he came around to seeing that that was a terrible statement. He wrote Verdi such a penitent letter that Verdi quite presciently wrote to, I think, recording someone else and said, is Bülow okay? I don't think he's okay. And of course he was committed very shortly afterwards for mental illness. The guy had a rough life, but even still, so it was just like, this is the most brilliant work, of course, and so on. So he, to his credit, he re-examined himself on that. But what's interesting about that to me, okay, Nico Muhly, advanced to the present day. He's one of the great speakers about music. If he comes here and you have a chance to hear him, composer, done some operas at the Met, a bunch of other things, terrific. And he's young. How old is Nico now? Like, if he's 35 by now and he's been around for 15 years, it'll be a miracle, right? He's young. He's annoyingly young. And so he always gets the question, and if you think I'm over-caffeinated on good San Francisco coffee, you've got to see Nico. he was born over-caffeinated. And so they're always going to ask him the question that we're always asking, well, who are you? You know, are you an alt classical composer or a neo, well, he wouldn't be a neo-classical composer, but a new classical composer or whatever. And you can see him twitching when they ask him, and they never don't ask him. Because what is a young person writing for the Metropolitan Opera today? What category? And he always cuts them off, and then there's hair, right? And he said the greatest line I'll never forget it. In List Hall, he said, you know, that problem of what category you are only really mattered to the guy at Tower Records, and he's not around anymore. And it was like, in other words, so the binaries that may come up in time out of convenience may not matter after a certain point. What is Nico Muhly? Well, it doesn't matter because you don't have to find the LP in the right. It's, you know, it's music, listen to it. So along with the Verdi Requiem, it's like, why don't we listen for the complex and nuanced stories of every individual rather than worrying about if somebody's on the right side of the border? And that becomes a really big issue. Okay, ethnicity, Canada, back to that one. We're just talking French. My brother's here, so he's the only other one who has this genetic identity on the planet. All four of our grandparents were immigrants. Lithuania, Palestine, Italy, and Mexico. What am I? Do you know how I panic every time I have to fill out the form? Other, thanks. I love that. I love being other. Am I authentically, we're talking again today, are you Jewish if two of your grandparents were Jewish? Well, it depends where they were. And then the really great thing, well, according to Jewish law, no. According to Nazi law, yes. Great. So in other words, ultimately, as with Richard Wagner's music, drama, not opera, every work, as with the Verdi Requiem, every work is a genus of one. Every work of art is a genus of one. I'm beginning to understand that every one of us is a gender of one and an ethnicity of one. And those three are not unrelated. What do we do? Well, I'll tell you. I'll bet you didn't think I would. We don't solve the problems of oppression inherent in the arts by denying their existence. That only makes them stealthily toxic. It doesn't make them go away. We address racism and sexism and every other ism in the arts by addressing the context of the arts. We define what is important and what isn't important in the classics by the context through which we present it. Okay, what does that mean in 5 minutes or less? Okay, what? Yeah. Who gets to play? Who gets to perform? There's that issue, right? Do we cast according to appearance, according to ethnicity, which is more than appearance? No, but we have to factor it in, and so on and so forth. And I bring this up because it's really interesting. Spade Jenkins, of course you know, from Seattle Opera and beyond, and he said, also in List Hall, wow, they say great things in List Hall. It's the ugliest room in the world in the Metropolitan Opera, but people, oh, wait, that sounded self-serving. People other than me give great talks there too. But anyway, he said, the two hardest things to put on the stage in opera are the dragon in Siegfried and Carmen, the character. And they're equally impossible for the same reason, which is that every one of you has an idea on the way into the theater of what it should be and could be, uniquely with these two things. And no one can live up to your idea of the woman of Carmen, the real woman of Carmen, and how do you see that which cannot be seen? Ride of the Valkyries, stage it, go ahead. You can't. You cannot do it right. That's the point. as it turns out. You have to keep trying and keep getting it wrong in new productions. That's the point. It's evolutionary, but whatever on that. And there's something else going on here in that, of course, our friend Friedrich Nietzsche. Yes, we have arrived at the point in the talk where we refer to Friedrich Nietzsche. Well, of course, Nietzsche famously, began his career by saying, oh my God, Richard Wagner is the salvation of the world. And wound up his career by saying, oh my God, Richard Wagner is a disease. That was the word he used. And the antidote is Carmen. Now, nobody loves Carmen more than I do, but I just think that Nietzsche felt things more intensely than we do. That's just the kind of guy he was. But il faut méditerraniser la musique, he writes in French, knowing that that's going to aggravate the pants off of Richard Wagner, who famously said, if I have to speak French for the next 10 years, I'll be dead in 5. I gotta relate to that, a little bit. I love languages, I can't get those diphthongs right. But anyway, there's some relationship between Carmen and the Ring, and it's an oppositional relationship, which is an intense relationship, as you know from astrology. You're exact opposites, you're in a tight relationship. So I was just in Chicago, Jamie Barton, who, yes, this is a shameless plug, wrote the foreword to my book, because I asked her, I texted her while she was preparing Brongana. Yeah, I said, this is either the worst or the best time to write you, but let me try it. And she said, yeah, I will. And she wrote that. So I went to Chicago a month ago to intercept her where she was performing Carmen at Chicago Opera Theater, semi-staged, with, and this is important, Stephanie Blythe as Don Jose. Yeah, whoa. Big whoa. Okay, what is even going on there? Well, a lot. But what was going on from Jamie's point of view, who is a self-identified activist, and not just a gender activist, but, and this is something I hadn't considered, a size activist. She's plus size. And she felt, she wondered if she could ever sing Carmen, because she didn't think she looked like what you thought Carmen should look like. And now, of course, if you're a mezzo-soprano, you know, as Marilyn Horne said, if you have a mezzo-soprano voice, you wake up every morning and say, please God, give me a new production of Carmen. It's what you exist for. It is the archetype of, it's the Holy Grail. And there are reasons for that. Carmen covers a lot of territory. And for Jamie to be Carmen and to go out on stage, and let me tell you, she was sexy. And she was sexy not, we Americans in 2021 tend to think of sexual turn on is purely a visual thing. And of course in the 19th century they understood that it was something you hear too. Well, in France, Bizet understood it. So did Saint-Saëns, right, with Delilah. Same thing. Sorry, I lost the key there, but you get the idea. And they heard, as they heard it, that descending chromatic or whatever it is, they heard a woman lying back, inviting a man onto her, and we have a harder time hearing what they heard. We think of our ancestors 150 years ago as repressed. It's like, oh no, they were the gotcha squad. They heard it, they saw it, everything. And Jamie became one of the great Carmens I've ever seen because she decided to accept herself as attractive as she was. She came out as Carmen does and basically says, she performs in the Habanera, which is a performance, and basically says, everybody wants me, don't they? And you have to, it doesn't matter what You look like I think it matters that you can believe that. Make me believe you believe that line. And she did. Very skimpily clad, I might add, which was very impressive. But gender and genre and type and category become an issue in choosing repertory. It becomes an issue in what we hear. It becomes an issue in who is presenting this art. Then there's backstage. Oh, well, there was Jamie. Sorry, I'm a slide behind. In Chicago. She's so beautiful too. So it's like, really? You just figured out that you're attractive enough to be Carmen? But you know, it's a hard inner journey for all of us. Morris Robinson, just singing the Landgrave in Tannhäuser in Los Angeles. Yeah, okay, how about that? So I caught up with him in LA. There I am, catching up with him in LA. Oh, I'm wearing the same pants, I should have made a note of that. Anyway, Morris Robinson has a lot to say about, not only about casting, but a lot more. He is very outwardly identified as an activist in the Black Lives Matter movement and is actively questioning people in arts management about what are we doing. And he brings up the point that, you know, he is actually a little sick of being the guy on the stage like, look, it's okay, we have Morris Robinson. All of our problems are over. Like, no, what about backstage? So context is, and then I was in LA, actually this night, my cousin who is in the Screenwriters Union was saying that now this is a question in unions, screenwriters in LA, but backstage in theaters and this sort of thing, that if you can have Morris Robinson on stage singing Sarastro, and if your union is monolithically white and that's not going to change because our unions in New York and in Germany have aspects to them of preferment that make them almost hereditary, you have a built-in problem. And then he said, and it was interesting, he said, oh, well, I don't feel intimidated walking backstage with the unions. And I said, I do. It is not safe. I do not do it alone. Which was interesting. So the context I'm talking about is people. Who's presenting the art that we want? What does that say about what we think is toxic or sublime in it? Inclusive or exclusive? But then there are places. The venue and the environment. This gets really interesting for you here in San Francisco. Oh, damn it. And then, okay, I'm going to do something really awful. I have an interview with them, thanks to you, that I put in the book, read it, about, and San Francisco Opera Management, no names please, were really cool and said, don't tell us what you think about what you see in Turandot and Madame Butterfly. Speak to these two Asian Americans and report what they say. And if they say, I'm sorry, we're going to have to cancel these works, that's the article you need to write. Well, they didn't, and it was more interesting. And I loved what Amy Tan said. Oh my God, she was so great. She said, if you look at the Princess Turandot and think of me, right away we have a problem. Because that has nothing to do with me. Madame Butterfly is another problem. But what was interesting, David Henry Hwang was saying, just because one is realism, Madame Butterfly, and one is fantasy, legend, fairy tale, doesn't give a complete pass on the fairy tale. And I thought that was interesting to us in Wagner when we talk about Meistersinger versus the Ring. Like, well, it's okay in the Ring because, you know, flying horses and dwarves sneezing underwater, it's not real. That doesn't mean that real issues aren't there. But anyway, more on that later. Of course, what we see on the stage, and I'm only going to make reference to this because I've given endless talks on this, including in San Francisco. Some of you have been there, Siegfried no less. But, you know, the old argument and let me say right now, this isn't the right argument. Is it a modern opera production or is it traditional? No. But we still have that argument, and to a certain extent, you can't, it's not an either-or situation. Neither one is inherently political. You can't quite say that a representational production of, say, The Ring is right-wing, and a very, you can't even see it, but trust me, this is right at the Valkyries of Robert Lepage. They're flying all around on the world's biggest planks. It's a trip. I don't know what else it is. It's a trip. You cannot say that a non-traditional, non-representational production is inherently left-wing. But you can almost say that. And in Germany, they certainly do. That is the way it is understood, even though it is a much more nuanced, difficult, excuse the expression, not black and white problem than that. But what you can say, and here is the other punchline, legislating either one as the only right way to present this art is political, it is totalitarian. And this came back at me, was it in Boston, and I didn't like it, but I said, no, that works equally true for either side of politics. And I didn't want to say yes, but I was like, yeah, that's so. The politics isn't in the work. Politics is in the legislation of presenting the work. And in the venue, context, where it happens. Actually, let me move ahead and come back. Stefan Lissner, who's now at the San Carlo in Naples. Was it La Scala? Was it Paris Opera? Guy's been around. So he gave this interview, I read it in La Prensa, I'm not sure where it's from, but that said, opera must leave its ivory tower. And then has this picture like, oh, like the one I happen to run, you know, the coolest theater in the world. The most beautiful, probably, the San Carlo, okay, fine. Which was funny, and in the article he addressed that, and it was actually really good. But the idea of where you present, where we experience the art, how much does that change what the art is? Ooh, Heisenberg. A lot. And there's this idea, look at this. Here we have the Chicago Symphony Hall, and you can't really see it well, but carved in what about Bach, Mozart, Beethoven, Schubert, Wagner. Wow, that's kind of ethnically monolithic, but okay, fine. You know, that's a German-derived tradition, and they're saying that. But they're saying that in the signs and symbols of Roman civic religion. Here we have, and you can barely see it again, but the proscenium of the Old Met. I was never at the Old Met. I'm not quite that old. But I know a lot of people loved it. I mean, I could have been. Anyway, a lot of people loved it, but we see here a problem. We have the names, Gluck, Mozart. I think they threw Gounod in there, wasn't that big of them. Maybe even Verdi. Beethoven, again, Beethoven and his one opera. Mozart, but with a lyre of Apollo, acanthus leaves, like on your money, the signs and symbols of Roman political legitimacy. In other words, this isn't a laboratory of ideas. The theater is a laboratory of ideas. This is a temple of, you should venerate these people. I don't want to venerate anybody, any human, least of all Wagner, that way. Now, the stuff, okay. We wrap this up, listener. Okay. One of the last acts of the Trump administration. This actually happened. An executive order on December 21st, 2020, you would think there would have been other problems to think about, that you will exclusively use the neoclassical architecture styles in all federal buildings. It said, make America beautiful again.
Oh my God.
Okay, knowing perfectly well that this would be rescinded almost immediately by the Biden administration. Countermand the order. But the idea of, so is neoclassical architecture inherently right-wing? Well, this bugs me, because I like it. And you may have guessed at this point, do not identify as right-wing. I find it rather liberating. I find some of the great ideas of the world have sprung out through this style of architecture, like democracy and theater at the same time, not unrelated, incidentally. I like this space right here. It's one of my favorite spaces in the world. And I keep checking myself for signs of incipient fascism. I just hit 60. I don't think it's happening.
Hardly.
Thank you. So I'm glad that's coming across. So no style of architecture is inherently political, although you can do commentary on it for days, and people do lazily, about how Albert Speer's designs for the Third Reich are inherently Nazi. They're not. That Albert Speer was mandated to build over old things like, I don't know if you can see this. This is a design for the Third Reich to subsume, to expand, but subsume the Bayreuth Festival House, which is barely visible in there. And you can see this wasn't done by Speer, but by one of his assistants. And it could have been done by Albert Speer, who was incidentally at this point busy as the Minister of Armaments. Not incidentally. But, okay. And we can, right away there's an icky, visceral reaction to this. Where the pillars are isn't the problem. The clear will of the Third Reich to put its will over the Gesamtkunstwerk vision is the problem. Well, and it is ugly, it's sin, but I just say that now. I mean, I couldn't say it I couldn't say otherwise. I couldn't say, I think it's kind of pretty. But to say in advance that, well, this architecture is this or that, or this clearly represents whatever, that's Monday morning quarterbacking, or whatever the operatic Wagnerian equivalent is. Okay, so let's wrap this up, because it is a nice day out. Oh, Lord. But there's a lot to talk about. Okay, but we will. The question... Okay, then there's the audience, the people beyond the buildings. Who is this all done for? And it's interesting because we're trying to expand audiences at the opera, not because we're enlightened, because we have to, as a business model. There are 8 times as many people as there were in the world the year Wagner and Berger were born. We have to expand audiences by 8 times to keep up to where we were then. And opera, I don't care what marketing departments tell you about, oh, it was popular music in Italy in the 19th century. No. There was no other music business in Italy in the 19th century, but it's always been a niche. We need to expand. So I just had this out at the Library Society of Charleston, founded 1748. With original members present, I'm sure of it. Who are saying, aren't you pandering to audiences? It's like, well, okay, one, you're a terrible person, but secondly, no, we need to do this as a business model. We need to let people know that these stories are about them. Now, do you have to do that by setting the Ring of the Nibelung in a hip-hop club in Atlanta? No, you might. But you don't have to. That's the good news. But somehow you need to let people know that we think these stories are about them, because they are. About everyone. Well, I'll tell you why. Okay. I'm going to skip that because that's really ugly. Ultimately, the question, Hans Sachs's problem, what did he get wrong? I think. He rightly pointed to the folk, the people, as the ultimate arbiters of art, and by implication everything else. Reich and Kunst are both Heilige. The realm and art are both holy. They're in a holy relationship to each other. Remember the last line? Right? The Holy Roman Empire will collapse, and with it, the Roman implications of the German nation, but that's all right. The Holy Roman Empire will collapse. Holy German art will endure forever. There's both a sublime and a toxic aspect to that, but fine. I can like that. But who are the folk? Are Jews? Certainly not in his vision, or Martin Luther's for that matter. Are Catholics? Certainly not in that vision. And yet, of course, let's not gloss over the fact that it was a Catholic monarch who was paying for this production, and King Ludwig of Bavaria, my hero, when you get right down to it. But that's all right. Are those who worship in a foreign language? In that vision, no. You can't be part of this club. I would like to see a way of saying yes. But it's not easy. The same questions, okay, definitely make this great, exist in France today. Can a Muslim be authentically French? Well, I'm hoping they say yes. And they're going to have to decide this, but it affects me. I'm not Muslim, I'm not French. I am human. But it's not easy for us or for Hans Sachs. What if the people I want to be counted as us don't count me as them? Right? Defining community is complex. It's the mistake of Meistersinger, but it's not an easy one to rectify. So what I would want to look out for was the same thing I wanted to look out for when I was visiting Sachsenhausen concentration camp. Yeah, not easy. And I went with the intention of feeling morally superior, and I came out realizing, oh, I don't feel that way. I feel strangely connected to this problem, implicated, just by being a human. So I feel the same way with the problems in Hans Sachs. It's not that easy to say, well, the community should be everybody. Who are you going to be? Which Hans Sachs are you going to be? Or are you going to be Sixtus Beckmesser? Which is weird because, and this becomes a thing in The Ring, and this is the point of my other book, but the whole Ring, I came to understand from many live performances, I'm sure some of you have been way more than I have, of the complete Ring, is that the process of the Ring is for you in the audience to have to figure out, am I going to be Alberich or Brunhilde? And it's the same as, Hans Martin Krenzler interviewed us, he said, have you noticed that anyone who sings Beckmesser can sing Hans Sachs, but they usually don't? Wait, that's really heavy. That's, again, we're into Licht Alberich and Schwarz Alberich. Light and dark Alberich. Okay. Alberich in The Ring is frozen in time. No, you wronged me. You stole from me. He's not wrong. He's right, actually. But, and then Loga even tells him, like, oh, and the Rhine Maidens, he tells the Rhine Maidens, Loga tells the Rhine Maidens, stop lamenting your lost ring. That's old news. Rejoice in the new order. Well, they don't want to, but okay. But Alberich is, and the music, all of his music, when he's, that great scene when he's just like ranting and like, you did this and you did that and you wronged me, and he's not wrong. But he's not going to go anywhere. He is incapable of evolving. The only one who can evolve is Brunhilde. No, we're going to have to change things here. And it involves some sacrifice. And how can we do that? How can we do that with the classics? Can we change things with love, the way she did? Farewell to Wotan at the end. I loved you, Father, but it's over. It's so over, I'm going to set you on fire. Like the good Hans Sachs, the part of Hans Sachs that we love. Obviously, creative process is a blend of old and new. And there's a little bit of madness in it. Fun. Can you do that? Or do you have to stick by the rules? But it is not. But Wagner said there should be a tree in the middle of Hunding's hut in Act 1, and I can't do a thing with my hair until I see one. Well, it's great if there's a tree in the middle of Act 1 of Die Valkyrie, and it's great if there isn't a tree, but it's really not the problem, and if you get hung up on it, you are part of the world that gets burned up and inundated at the end of that, every time the process changes. So who are you going to be? Who are we going to be as lovers of the classics? I don't have an answer for that. Thank you.
Those who sing how to sausage. No, me doing a PowerPoint, you don't want to see that. There we go. Sorry, let me break that.
Hello? Okay. It's time to open up to some questions, and what I would like to do is run around with the microphone and hand you, unless you can stand up and maybe lift your mask a little and ask your question, or I'll bring the microphone to you so that we'll...
Use your New York voice.
Yeah. Hey!
Yo!
I'm walking here.
Watch
Do you
it.
have a question? Hands? Just
I don't believe this for a minute.
Oh, wow, here we go. I knew
Uh-oh,
that.
we're starting at the top. He's
Yeah.
taking
Very,
notes.
very good talk with a lot of evocative ideas, things to think about. There are some problems, if I can just list maybe three of them. One is you use the word lazy, and I think that's really key. It takes work to go from here to somewhere else. And there you showed us different ways in which there's work to be done by we who feel like we're part of the sustaining people within the community of opera as a serious work of art, and everybody else, but also we as people who go to opera. I, for example, am somebody who makes and produces opera. It takes work to not only have an idea to go someplace different, but actually to start to move there. Second is, binaries are not great, but they're part of the way we think, and they do persist. And the people who have binaries are not easily to bring along with us, the people who don't want to think in binary. That's a big problem. Is it a practical problem? Is it a problem of thinking? I'm not sure. Right. Likewise, that creating art as an activity and having everybody along with us involves a lot of people who carry their own definitions, whether they're binary or not. And part of Wagner's life and his mission was to destroy definitions, not to make new ones, but to destroy them forever. That's very hard to do when Wagner himself has become a tradition. It's very hard, if you have a Wagner society, not to feel that you're defining yourself as being a member of a tradition. So that comes down to, again, not being lazy. So yes, I'm a Wagnerite, but that must not contain me. I guess that's... the last thing is that big deal about Meistersinger is it's a setting in a ostensibly homogeneous civilization or society, which the whole point of the opera, I believe, is that it's not really homogeneous. But one of the reasons why it was very beloved by the German people is that they saw it as a reflection of their somehow homogeneous society. The essence of that opera is to show that homogeneity is the enemy of not just art, but of human achievement. So how can we exploit pieces like Meistersinger and show that what we really want to go for is heterogeneity, that different people, the outsider, there's several different outsiders, not least of which is the woman who's the outsider in a world dominated by men. It's the young who are in a world dominated by older people. It's the people who want to be free versus the people who want to make definitions. I always thought a good way of doing Meistersinger was to start with Nuremberg and show that it was that cathedral. It wasn't, but pretend that it was a different cathedral, was built on the remnants of the Jewish ghetto, which was burned down, and they built a cathedral. It wasn't the Stephanskirche, whatever the name that. Katrina. It wasn't, but another, and to have Walter be a Jew, or the other way around is to have Meistersingers all be Jews, and Walter be a non-Jew.
I wouldn't do that.
It would be great.
Well, it would
Because
it
it
would
would
start a
because-
conversation.
Yes.
It would start a I love everything you just said. That's all I have to say about that.
That's always interesting. Anybody?
Come to his talks.
Oh, I know. Jonathan is wonderful, and he gives preview lectures sometimes for the San Francisco Opera Guild, and they're always very detailed and wonderful. Did you have a question?
Well, I have a comment. You talked a bit about the racial implications and ethnic implications of opera, and being a part of the past. And I'm thinking, what's going on today, and what's going on in modern day? Look at modern rap music. That can be pretty violent and violates all of these things. I don't think the world has changed that much.
I happen to agree. But here's what's weird, and I have a whole rap on this, and I didn't want to get to it, but rap on this. The reason I'm talking about this right now is because we're in a 1558 moment. Work with me. A moment where we need to ask ourselves and define who are we, what are we up to, as Wagner thought 1558 was, and not just Wagner. It's very interesting because Don Carlos also takes place in 1558, and that's another Verdi, and that's another, how are we going to be Christian? You know, like, is this the right way, or is that, well, none of them have the right way, but whatever. The 19th century, the people in 1867, 1868 were looking at 1558 as a time when everyone in Europe had to say, who are we? And it matters. And the whole world is going to either basically blow up or come together depending on what we figure out here now. Who I make love to, whose treasure box I steal, and 2021 is 1558, and it's a 1918, I think of it as a 1918 moment. In 1918, you had the war ended, the Great War, several empires collapsed, a lot of countries, not just in Europe, realigned. There was a global pandemic, and everything seemed, the hardwiring inside individuals' heads changed. Everything seemed different in 1919. All music sounded different in 1919 than it had in 1917. Case in point, Puccini, the mature Puccini, wrote an opera in 1917 that when it was produced in 1919, everybody said, what? They couldn't even hear it, La Rondine. Now it's repertory. But in the post-traumatic moment of 1919, it just didn't resonate. All of a sudden, people think jazz was invented after World War I. It wasn't. People think the tango was invented after World War I. It wasn't. They both existed before. But all of a sudden, people heard jazz and tango everywhere. My grandfather, who was not Argentine, became a tango dancer. Because all of a sudden, it made sense in a way it didn't. And 2021 is 1918, is 1558. The theater's closed. They're reopening now. When they reopen, like I said with Meistersinger, when they reopen, I saw the same opera with mostly the same cast, except a different fabulous soprano, but besides that. But I had a very different experience at Meistersinger because I'm not the same as I was in 2014. And neither are you, and neither is anything. I really think that in the in the next couple of years, that blue blazer you bought that's going to last forever will look different. Will look like, well, that's a piece of retro clothing or whatever. So what I'm thinking about right now is, yes, asking the real questions of, right here, right now, 2021, 1918, 1558. 1759, I have a friend in Quebec who says, imagine your entire cultural identity defined by 20 minutes of a battle that took place in 1759, French Canadian. Said, every single day there is something you see that reminds you, yeah, but you lost that battle in 1759, so learn your English or whatever. It is a defining moment, and we're in one of those. And that's why we have to talk about it now. Because how are we going, as we reopen, as we go back to the opera and everything else, am I feeling the same things? Am I seeing the same things? Am I hearing the same things? Do I have the same values I did in 2019? You can't. Brunhilde would have understood that, and Albert would have. And that doesn't mean you get rid of things. That doesn't mean you have to, that doesn't really mean you have to change anything. It means we have to admit that we're not feeling the same things that we felt before because we're fundamentally different. And it's like you said, to not do that is lazy. If I'm going to say, oh, and people do, okay. Well, there was this singer, great singer, one of the world's great singers. And he's very charismatic, and I've always had a huge crush on him. And he knows it. And it came up in conversation, he just said, oh, the Verdi record, it's so theatrical. I've never spoken to him yet. Because I can't look at him without wanting to take his brain out, put it in the mix master, and then put it back in. Because I don't believe he felt that, especially as a singer with a role in that. I believe he felt he was supposed to say that because Bülow said it in 1875. And that made me really mad. Because Verdi I demand for Verdi that you give him the respect to say, no, what do you think about this piece? That to quote what the greatest minds of 1875 said, doesn't make you intellectual, it makes you lazy. And the classics deserve better, and they can stand up to better. So, I hear your concerns about where the narrative and the dialogue sometimes go, and that's part of the dialogue. So thank you.
Here, you can have the microphone.
Yeah, take it away from me. Don't give it to that guy in front.
Wait, well, I was standing facing Jeff and.
Yeah, if Jeff doesn't get his hand up, I'm going to get it for him.
I better ask a question. Yeah, I love what you were saying about the final monologue and for Hans Sachs, as well as what the kids thought of Porgy and Bess. And just kind of made me think of talking about Lohengrin and hearing the joke of what time does the next swan or something.
What is so funny about that joke?
It's that's the kind of gets at this like performative idea of some of these things just kind of persist, even if I don't think it's funny, but I hear it and I might giggle or just kind of perform. How big of a drag are these little things? Some are probably bigger than others, but on people really discovering opera and finding out what it means to them and this new audience we're pursuing.
I'll tell you, there's one thing that everyone on the planet knows they're supposed to think, which is like, oh, Wagner. I don't like him, and it's like, wait a second. Yeah, but no, yeah, I want you to look into the problems. But if you just go by the Wagner thing, you know what you're doing? You're giving a pass to the problems. And not only that, you're saying, if I know that I'm supposed to hate Wagner because he was an anti-Semitic schmuck, frankly, then you're letting everybody else get a free pass. And what I want to do is I want to take what we've learned with the problems in Wagner, and then if we have to apply them to Wagner, and we do, we have to apply them to everybody else and ourselves. So I think that is, on the macro sense, that's a big thing. And it does keep people away from the classics. And all the things, okay, here's a better one. I don't know what else I can do to tell people that opera doesn't necessarily have to be elitist. Really? I mean, I'm from the wrong side of LA, and I don't even know that there's a right side of LA, but I'm not from it. And at a certain, Kill the Wabbit. I never need to hear that referred to again. Because in 1954, interestingly, the year that came out, Boris Goldovsky had my job. The great Boris Goldovsky was the commentator for the Met Opera. And he had a point of view that was very good at the time for making more people, for opening the door to this foreign art form. But his point of view, he had the accent, he had the erudition, clearly, he had the certain things that at a certain point, I think it was important to parody, to take a little air out, bring him down to earth. And Kill the Wabbit did that really well. I'm the commentator for the Metropolitan Opera now. You don't need to take me down. I'm down. That's my baseline. In other words, so keep saying, I need to parody this because opera's so elite and I need to bring down. At a certain point, it occurred to me that the accusation of elitism is its own form of elitism. It's other, you know it isn't an elite art form that way. It's elite in the sense of, you better bring your A game, and you better sit up and pay attention because the Meistersinger von Nurnberg is 6 hours long and it has a lot of weird things in it. It's also probably the most sublime score ever composed. And not just, it's also a masterpiece and not just musically. How can that be? Well, as I say in my book, I always use the example of the Aeneid, which I studied in Santa Cruz. And the Aeneid is a propaganda piece commissioned by the first Roman emperor to make a case for the divine manifestation, the Roman Empire as the God's will for human order. Well, it isn't. It wasn't, and it fell. And I'm fine with that. So do we get rid of the Aeneid? No, of course not. Although, frankly, most everyone has. But I think that's a mistake, and I think that we can read what is eternally true in the Aeneid as well as what is patently false, because we're intelligent and we think critically. So, opera is elitist, yeah, you better bring your that kind of A game. As Toscanini said, and I know this can be argued, but I like it, be Democrats in life, but aristocrats in art. I know they're different, yeah, but you know what? It's workable. So that, the whole thing there, and in particular, the reflexive, you can't say you're going to a Wagner performance without having somebody sing Kill the Wabbit to you. It's like, why? Why did you have to do that? To make yourself feel okay with the fact that I'm going to a Wagner performance. That's not because I need to be parodied as, excuse me for saying so, today's version of Boris Goldovsky. I don't. So what's there? That's a good example. Was that a satisfactory answer? Was that 10 satisfactory answers?
Do we have anyone else? Oh, here we go.
speaking of attempts to
Your mask up can come up. There you go.
I love your mask, by the way. I loved it the last time I was here.
Thanks. It's not the one I thought I was grabbing this morning. But
It's never the wrong idea.
no, great, thanks. I'm glad to hear that. Attempts to fix some of these problems in Wagner. I think the crudest being simply cutting Hans Sachs's remarks about holy German art. But I also think we've seen one, at least one, where Beckmesser is driven out of the community, but then comes back and is welcomed back by Sachs, and it begins to be a sort of different lesson than the driving out one. I think the whole thing of making Beckmesser completely a buffoon also takes it out of some of the uncomfortable realms. I don't know if there's a question there. But
I'm more and more into Beckmesser the more I see that opera. I find it a more nuanced and fascinating role than I ever did. And plus, Hans-Martin Krenzler has been doing this kind of death metal thing with the lute. Oh my God, it's brilliant. Anyway, every production is commentary. Every production is a director doing what I do in paper. And remember, production's not just the sets and costumes, as people tend to think. It's how the characters interact, it's how long the intermissions are, what happens to the audience, right? Every production, this is especially visible in The Ring, is a statement of what you think The Ring is. And what is interesting to me about that is that no one ever is going to get it right. And can we live with that? Because I think that's the way to live. Remember, Wagner, 1876, the only Ring he produced. And at the end of it, he said, next time we'll do it all differently.
Yeah.
And there was no next time. And then it became, the 1876 Ring became fossilized until basically, well, there were changes. Well, actually until the Third Reich, actually, of all people, came up with a new production, but not really. So until 1951, it was fossilized. So this goes into, all right, stasis, fossilization is revisionism. It's a correction of what, so if we look at a production as not the eternal statement of what it always has to be, but another step in the evolution of our understanding of this endlessly fascinating work, I think we're on the right track. So that wasn't a question, that wasn't an answer, but you know.
Anyone else have any questions? Okay, well then I guess you have another one?
I just have a comment.
Okay.
People that don't like Wagner, or they say, oh, it's too long. You know what my answer is? How can anything be too long when you wish it never would end?
I'm using that on the radio.
Okay, you get a copyright on that one. I want to thank everybody for coming today. I see some individuals who may not have made a reservation. We had limitations on the number of people we could put in the room. The tables were here to socially distance us. We're hoping this is going to be eased a little bit. We can only hope by next year when we have our first quarter meeting. And I want to thank you all for coming today. It makes me feel good to know that the people still want to get together and have the community that is this society. It's hard to do it behind a screen or even with little boxes on a screen. It's hard to do it because it really doesn't feel like, you know, you're all together, and now we have those opportunities. So hopefully we'll be able to open up a little bit more next time, and thank you all for being here. We really appreciate it. Don't forget,